Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to be part of our loving community. There are some secrets you wish you never uncovered, but once you do, there's no turning back. I never thought I'd be here, spilling this story. Not because I don't want to, but because every time I relive that night, it feels like my soul is being ripped apart all over again. I still remember the way my hands were shaking, how my breath caught in my throat like I was drowning in thick air. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears, I could barely hear anything else. But I saw it, clear as day. What I saw that night shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. I know people say that sometimes your gut tells you things before your brain catches up. That was me. I should have listened. The weird glances. The uneasy feeling in my stomach. The way someone felt just slightly off. But I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things. That I was overthinking. That I was being paranoid. Until that night. That night, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that made my stomach turn, my knees go weak, and my entire world tilt sideways. I was standing in the doorway, frozen. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My fingers gripped the wall so tight I thought my nails would snap. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought, no, this can't be happening. This isn't real. But it was real. Nick, my stepson, the boy I had helped raise, the boy I had loved like my own, he was at the center of it. And what he was doing, who he was doing it with. I wish I could erase it from my memory. I wish I had just walked away, gone to bed, acted like I never saw a damn thing. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I was more shocked by what I saw, or by the way it made me feel. Before I reveal what really happened that night. Before I tell you how this one moment flipped my entire life upside down, I need you to do something for me. Make sure to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga because, trust me, you do not want to miss stories like this one. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered a secret you wish you never knew? Alright, here's how it all started. I was never the kind of woman who believed my life would turn out this way. When I married my husband, I imagined love that would last, a partnership built on trust, warmth, and companionship. But as the years passed, that vision faded. We had been together for over 10 years, and somewhere along the way, the man I married disappeared into the demands of his work. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't violent. But he was absent. Always at the office. Always distracted. Even when he was home, his mind was somewhere else. Emails, phone calls, late nights spent staring at his laptop. At first, I convinced myself it was normal. Marriage changes. Passion fades. But it wasn't just the lack of affection, it was the way I had started to feel invisible. Like I was nothing more than a presence in the house, a fixture, a shadow passing through the halls. I missed being touched. I missed feeling seen. And then, there was Nick. My husband's son from his previous marriage. He had always been polite, always carried himself with confidence. He was charming in a way his father never was, self-assured, magnetic. He had his father's looks, but none of his coldness. Nick had lived with his mother most of his life, but when he turned 20, he moved in with us to be closer to school. At first, it was an adjustment. Having a young man in the house again, the sudden shift in energy. But over time, I started to notice things. He was attentive. In ways that my husband hadn't been in years. At first, I brushed it off. He was just being kind. Thoughtful. But then, the way he looked at me lingered a little too long. The way his compliments felt different. The house was big, beautiful, a suburban dream. But it felt empty. Cold. My husband and I barely spoke outside of routine conversations, bills, schedules, what to make for dinner. There were no fights, no drama. Just silence. And in that silence, loneliness crept in. Loneliness makes you see things differently. It makes you crave connection, makes you hyper-aware of the moments that make you feel something. Anything. And Nick, he made me feel something. I should have seen the danger. I should have understood what was happening. But I didn't. Not until it was too late. It started with something small. Something that, at the time, I told myself meant nothing. I had come home earlier than expected. It was a rare night when my husband wasn't working late, and I thought, maybe we could have dinner together, talk, reconnect. A foolish hope, but one I still clung to. The house was quiet except for a low murmur coming from down the hall. Nick's room. Then laughter. Soft at first, then deeper, richer. I hesitated in the hallway, one hand gripping my purse, the other resting on the doorframe. I wasn't sure why I stopped. It wasn't unusual for Nick to be on the phone or watching something. But something about this laughter felt off. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from watching a comedy or talking to a friend. It was low, intimate, almost like a secret. I told myself I was being ridiculous. But then I heard my name. My pulse quickened. I wasn't imagining it. He had said my name. I stepped closer, barely breathing, heart hammering in my chest. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see his reflection in the mirror. Nick was lying on his bed, phone in hand, his head tilted back against the pillow, grinning in a way that made something deep in my stomach twist. Then, as if sensing me, he turned his head, just slightly. Our eyes met through the mirror. I should have looked away. Should have kept walking, should have pretended I didn't hear anything. But I didn't. For a second, neither of us moved. The air between us felt thick, charged with something unspoken. Then, so casually it made my skin prickle, Nick smirked. I swallowed hard and forced my feet to move. I barely remembered walking to my room. My fingers trembled as I set down my purse. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting, that it was all in my head. But the unease stayed with me. And then, there was the beach trip. A week later, my husband suggested we go to the coast for the weekend. A rare gesture, something that almost felt like an attempt to fix what was broken between us. I agreed, hoping the ocean air would clear my mind. It didn't. The first day, we sat up by the water. My husband barely spoke, already distracted by emails and work calls, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Nick, on the other hand, was different. Relaxed, comfortable, almost too comfortable. At one point, I was adjusting my chair, struggling with the latch, when Nick appeared beside me. His hands brushed over mine as he helped, fingers lingering just a second too long. I looked up. He was already watching me. The way he looked at me, it wasn't innocent. It wasn't the way a stepson should look at his father's wife. I felt my heart stutter, a strange heat crawling up my spine. But before I could say anything, before I could even make sense of what I was feeling, my husband called his name. Nick turned away, grinning like nothing had happened. I told myself I had imagined it. But the way my hands still tingled said otherwise. And in that moment, I knew. Something was happening. Something I wasn't ready to admit. Something I couldn't ignore. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The look in his eyes. The way his hand lingered. The way my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my husband sleeping soundly beside me, his back turned like always. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. That I was reading into things. That maybe it was just me. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I was desperate for attention. Maybe I was imagining something that wasn't really there. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. Nick's behavior was changing. It started subtly. A touch on my lower back as he passed by in the kitchen, casual, but his fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary. A glance held too long, his gaze dipping just low enough to make my pulse jump. Late-night conversations in the dim glow of the living room, his voice softer, more intimate, asking questions my husband never did. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard one night. My hands froze on my teacup, the steam curling into the air between us. "What do you mean?" Nick tilted his head, studying me in that way that made my stomach tighten. "I don't know. Just, you don't seem like it." I should have laughed it off. I should have told him I was fine. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I wasn't. And he knew it. The way he looked at me wasn't the way a stepson should look at his father's wife. And worse, I didn't stop him. I wanted to. I should have. But instead, I found myself waiting for those moments. Searching for them. I hated myself for it. Every night, I told myself I was overthinking, that he was just being friendly, charming the way he always had been. But the voice in my head, the one that whispered late at night, the one that made my breath hitch whenever he got too close, told me otherwise. I started avoiding him. I told myself it was for the best, that if I created distance, it would all go away. But he noticed. "Are you avoiding me?" he asked one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter as I busied myself with washing dishes. Of course not. My voice was too quick, too defensive. Nick stepped closer. I felt the warmth of his body before he even touched me. "I feel like you are." I gripped the edge of the sink, the water running too hot over my hands. "You're imagining things," I murmured. Nick didn't respond right away. Then, lower, softer, "Maybe we both are." I should have turned around. I should have stopped this before it became something I couldn't control. But instead, I stayed frozen, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. If I told someone, they'd think I was crazy. They'd say it was all in my head. Maybe they'd be right. Maybe I wanted them to be. I started noticing it more. The way Nick looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. But then I'd catch him, his eyes lingering, his expression unreadable. He never looked away quickly, never seemed embarrassed to be caught. Instead, he held my gaze, like he was waiting for me to acknowledge what we both knew but refused to say. I started feeling it in the air between us. A tension that crackled, something neither of us dared name. Then, one night, it changed. It was late. My husband had gone to bed hours ago, lost in his own world, as usual. I stayed up, nursing a glass of wine, enjoying the rare silence of the house. Nick walked in. He was relaxed, barefoot, the faintest trace of a grin on his lips. "Drinking alone?" he teased, sliding onto the couch across from me. "Sometimes it's nice," I replied, taking another sip, pretending his presence didn't make my skin hum. He watched me for a long moment before pouring himself a glass. "Guess I'll join you." We talked. About nothing. About everything. About things I never talked about with my husband. Then he said it. "You know, if you weren't married to my dad, I think we'd get along really well." The words hung between us, thick, heavy, dripping with meaning. I should have left. I should have brushed it off, told him to stop, told him this wasn't funny. But I didn't. I met his gaze, my grip tightening around the stem of my glass. "That's not funny, Nick." "Who said I was joking?" My breath hitched. He was still watching me, unblinking, unreadable. I set my glass down, stood up, mumbled something about going to bed. My hands were shaking. My pulse was racing. I told myself I was imagining things. That it was just the wine, the late hour. That Nick was young, impulsive, teasing in a way that meant nothing. But I felt it in my bones. This wasn't nothing. And then everything shifted. The next day, I walked past his room and something caught my eye. His door was slightly open, just enough for me to see him sitting on the edge of his bed, phone in hand. His expression was intense, focused, his thumbs flying across the screen. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But then, I heard the notification sound from my own phone. A chill ran down my spine. I reached for it, my fingers unsteady. A message. From an unknown number. "I know you feel it too." I stared at the screen, my heart slamming against my ribs. I looked up. Nick was still in his room, still typing, completely unaware that I was watching. Or maybe he knew. Maybe he wanted me to see. I stepped back, my breath shallow, my mind spinning. This was real. This wasn't a game. And now, I had no idea how to stop it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That message, staring back at me from my phone, was a door I wasn't ready to open. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. "I know you feel it too." My breath was shallow, my fingers ice cold against the screen. My body tensed as I forced myself to move, to think, to do something other than stand there like my world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Nick was still in his room. The glow of his phone screen lit up his face, his fingers steady, his posture relaxed, like he hadn't just set my whole body on fire with a handful of words. I backed away, turned on my heel, and locked myself in the bathroom. My hands trembled as I gripped the sink. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide, pupils blown with something I couldn't name. Was this real? Was this actually happening? I should have deleted the message. Pretended I never saw it. I should have put my phone down and walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I did something worse. Something I still can't explain. I typed back. Nick, what are you doing? A pause. Then, 3 dots blinking on the screen. My stomach clenched. Then, his reply. Finally, you're asking the right question. A sharp knock on the door. I jumped, my phone slipping from my hands and clattering against the sink. My breath caught in my throat. Are you okay? Nick. His voice was too calm, too casual. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he had been waiting for this moment. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. Yeah, I'm fine. Silence. Then, his footsteps retreating down the hall. I should have stopped there. But I didn't. That night, sleep was impossible. My husband lay beside me, snoring softly, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. My mind spun, replaying every touch, every glance, every moment that had led us here. Then, around midnight, I heard it. A soft vibration. A notification. Another message. This time, a picture. I tapped it open, my heart in my throat. It wasn't inappropriate. Not really. It was just a picture of my wine glass from earlier, sitting on the table, a single fingerprint smudged on the side. My fingerprint. A message followed. You left your mark. A chill ran down my spine. I had to stop this. I had to put an end to whatever this was before it went too far. But then, the next morning, everything fell apart. My husband had left early for work. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked downstairs, heart still pounding from the night before. But as I reached the kitchen, something made me freeze. Nick's phone. Left carelessly on the counter. Screen unlocked, a message thread open. My name. Dozens of messages. Sent to someone else. I shouldn't have looked. I should have walked away. But my hands moved before I could stop them. And what I saw. It made my stomach drop. Messages, paragraphs of them, all about me. Descriptions of moments I thought had passed unnoticed. The way I bit my lip when I was nervous. The way my breath hitched when he stood too close. The way my hands trembled when I read his texts. He had noticed everything. Then, the last message, sent just minutes before I walked into the kitchen. I think she's finally ready. The air left my lungs. Behind me, a voice. Find anything interesting? I spun around. Nick stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the counter. Nick, what the hell is this? His lips curled into the slightest smirk. I told you. You feel it too. The air in the room shifted. It was suffocating. I wanted to scream. To push past him, to pretend this wasn't happening. But the worst part? A tiny, terrible part of me wasn't sure if I wanted to. I felt like the walls were closing in. Nick didn't move. He just stood there, watching me, his arms crossed like he was waiting for something. A reaction. A confession. I gripped the edge of the counter, my mind spinning, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. What is this, Nick? My voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He stepped closer instead. Slow, deliberate. The same way he always did, like he knew exactly what he was doing. You already know. I shook my head, my pulse racing. No, I don't. So tell me. His eyes flickered to his phone on the counter, then back to me. You weren't supposed to see that. Not yet. Not yet. The words sent a shiver down my spine. So you admit it? My voice cracked. He exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair, something shifting in his expression. I admit that I see you. His voice was lower now, more serious. I admit that I've watched you disappear in this house. That I've seen the way he treats you. Or doesn't. I clenched my jaw, shaking my head, stepping back. This is insane. You're my don't. His voice was sharp now. Don't say it like that, like it actually means something. His words hit like a slap. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell. I wanted to shove him out of my way and act like none of this was happening. But I couldn't, because deep down, I knew he was right. I had been disappearing. Nick had just been the only one to notice. My hands were trembling. My stomach churned. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. This has to stop. Does it? His voice was calm. Too calm. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breathing unsteady. If my husband finds out, Nick scoffed. If? You think he cares enough to even notice? That hit deeper than it should have. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I knew the answer. I turned away, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. This isn't a game, Nick. I know it's not. His voice was closer now. You think I planned this? You think I wanted this to happen? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. I think we both let something happen that never should have. Silence. For a second, I thought maybe he'd step back. That maybe, finally, this moment would break and we'd go back to normal. But then I felt it. A soft, careful touch on my arm. Just enough to make me inhale sharply. You can lie to yourself all you want. His voice was just behind me now. But you can't lie to me. I whipped around so fast he actually took a step back. That's enough. I barely recognized my own voice. Nick stared at me. Studied me. Then, for the first time, I saw something shift in his expression. A flicker of something. Hurt? No. It was something else. Acceptance. Like he already knew how this would end. Without another word, he grabbed his phone off the counter, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. The moment he was gone, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My hands shook as I gripped the counter, my legs weak beneath me. What the hell had I just done? What the hell had I let happen? I had spent so much time worrying about what would happen if my husband found out. But now, I was starting to realize something worse. It wasn't just about if he found out. It was about when. I sat in the empty kitchen long after Nick had gone. The silence around me was deafening, pressing against my skin, sinking into my bones. My hands were still shaking. My breath was uneven. I kept replaying it. The words. The looks. The way my body had betrayed me, reacting before my mind could catch up. What if I had never seen that message? What if I had never picked up his phone? Would it have changed anything? Or was this always going to happen? The weight of it all settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I had spent so long craving to be seen, to be noticed. And now that I was, all I wanted was to disappear. I thought about my husband. Would he even care if he found out? Or would this just be another inconvenience, another thing to brush off while he drowned himself in work? Would he be angry? Hurt? Would he blame me? Or worse, would he not be surprised? I rubbed my temples, squeezing my eyes shut. No. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't. Some truths destroy more than they heal. And this truth? This one could ruin everything. But keeping it inside felt just as unbearable. I could feel it clawing at my chest, a secret too big, too dangerous to keep locked away. What if this wasn't the first time Nick had done something like this? That thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Had I been blind? Had I been just another name on a list of women he had played this game with? Or was this different? I didn't know which thought scared me more. I had to do something. But what? If I confronted Nick again, would it change anything? Would he back off? Or would it only make things worse? And if I said nothing, how much further would this go? My pulse throbbed against my temples. There was no right answer. No way out that didn't end in disaster. All I knew was that the moment I stepped out of this kitchen, nothing would ever be the same. No matter what I chose, this secret had already changed everything. Secrets are like poison. They seep into every part of you, slow at first, until one day you wake up and realize you can't breathe without tasting the bitterness of them. I had a choice. Tell the truth and watch everything fall apart, or bury it so deep that even I would start to question if it had ever really happened. But here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried. They fester. They grow. And when they finally surface, they take down everything in their path. I still don't know which would have been worse, telling my husband the truth or pretending like nothing ever happened. Maybe I'll never know. Maybe that's the real punishment. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us in ways we never see coming. And sometimes, we're the ones holding the knife without even realizing it. So I have to ask you, what would you do? Would you tell the truth and risk losing everything? Or would you keep the secret, knowing that one day, it might destroy you from the inside out? I need to know I'm not alone. Tell me in the comments. And if you think this was shocking, just wait. There are more stories, more secrets, more betrayals. Subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga and turn on notifications, because trust me, the next story, it's even worse.